There was a store once that did not look like a store. You might walk in beneath the golden mask of an Egyptian pharaoh, past columns built to look like a temple to a civilization that worshipped circuitry. In another city, you entered through the nose cone of a crashed flying saucer, aliens frozen mid-invasion above the checkout lanes. In another, the Old West. In another, the inside of a computer itself. And once you were through the theme, you found the real spectacle. Acres of shelving that ran from microprocessors and capacitors to washing machines, from oscilloscopes to soda and candy stacked by the register. It was a place built on a single, strange, brilliant idea, that an engineer who came in at 11 at night for a specific resistor should be able to leave with that resistor, a refrigerator, and a bag of chips. For 36 years, that idea worked. And then, on the 24th of February 2021, the people who worked there arrived to find the doors locked and a notice posted online. All 31 stores across 9 states were closing that day, not reorganizing, not restructuring, closing. There was no drawn-out bankruptcy, no going out of business sale stretched over months. One day, the temple of the do-it-yourself age was open. The next, it was simply gone. To understand how something can vanish that abruptly, you have to understand that it had been hollowing out from the inside for more than a decade, and that some of the damage was not done by the market at all, but by a single trusted man with a spreadsheet. The company was founded in 1985 by 3 brothers and a 4th partner who together saw something that the big appliance chains and the small component shops had both missed. The electronics world of that era was split in 2. If you wanted a television, you went to a department store. If you wanted the raw parts to build or repair something yourself, you went to a cramped specialty shop that sold nothing else. Nobody served the whole person, the Silicon Valley engineer who was, at once, a serious technical professional and an ordinary human being who also needed a microwave and something to eat. The founders built a store for exactly that person, and they placed those stores in the heartland of the technology industry, where that person existed by the tens of thousands. The concept was often described, only half as a joke, as a superstore that sold everything from potato chips to computer chips. That breadth was not clutter. It was the entire strategy. The idea was that the store should capture the complete needs of a technically minded customer under one enormous roof, so that there was never a reason to shop anywhere else. And for a long time, that customer was fiercely loyal, because no one else offered the same combination of depth and convenience. You could find an obscure cable that no other retailer in the country stocked, and you could find it at midnight, because the stores kept the kind of hours that respected how the people who shopped there actually lived. The theming was part of the same instinct. In an industry that was becoming more abstract and more invisible by the year, software networks, code that no customer would ever see, the stores were deliberately, extravagantly physical. Walking into a retail experience dressed as an Egyptian tomb or an alien landing was a promise that shopping here would be an event, not an errand. It bound the customer to the place. For the better part of 2 decades, the formula produced one of the most beloved and distinctive retail chains in the American West. A genuine cultural institution for anyone who built, fixed, or obsessed over technology. At its height, the chain was something close to a landmark. It grew to dozens of stores concentrated in the technology corridors of the American West and Southwest, employing thousands of people and drawing customers who treated a trip there as a small pilgrimage. Engineers planned weekend projects around it. Parents brought children to gawk at the alien or the pharaoh. It occupied a place in the culture of its region that few retailers ever reach. Not merely a place to buy things, but a shared reference point, the kind of store people assumed would simply always be there. That assumption is the most dangerous one any customer or any company can make, because permanence in retail is never given. It is earned again every single quarter, on the strength of decisions being made in rooms the customer never sees. But underneath the spectacle, a quieter and far more dangerous story was unfolding in the offices where nobody theatrical ever went, the merchandising department, where decisions were made about which products filled those endless shelves and on what terms. This is the least glamorous corner of any retailer and the most important. The person who controls what a store buys, and at what price, controls the store's relationship with every supplier and ultimately, with every customer who trusts that the shelves reflect an honest judgment about what is worth selling. At this company, for years, that power sat with one executive, and that executive was running a scheme. His method was simple to describe and devastating in effect. As the man who decided which suppliers got their goods onto the shelves and in what quantities, He held enormous leverage over vendors desperate for placement. He used it. He arranged to buy their products at inflated prices and to buy far more of them than the business actually needed, and in exchange the suppliers paid him kickbacks, by one account, as much as 31% of the total sales price, routed to him through a shell company he controlled. The stated reason for a purchasing decision was the good of the store. The real reason, again and again, was the enrichment of the man making it. Over several years, prosecutors would later say, this arrangement funneled more than $65 million to him personally. Consider what that means beyond the theft itself. The number is shocking, but the deeper wound is invisible in it. For years, the merchandising of a major retailer, the single most important function it had, the decision about what to put in front of customers, was being made not to serve customers or the company, but to maximize secret payments to one person. The shelves themselves were corrupted. Products were there because someone was paying to have them there, in quantities set by a bribe rather than by demand. A store's whole promise is that its shelves represent a good faith answer to the question, what should I buy? That promise had been quietly for sale. Where did the money go? Not into anything that lasted. The executive was, by the accounts that emerged, a spectacular gambler, and Las Vegas records would later show sums wagered in the years of the scheme that ran to more than $160 million. The stolen fortune did not build a rival business or buy a hidden empire. It was fed into casinos and a lifestyle, converted into nothing. The company was being bled to fund the disappearance of money into a desert. The scheme did not end because the controls caught it. It ended in the autumn of 2008, almost by accident. Another executive walked into the man's office when he was not there and noticed spreadsheets left out in the open, documents laying out the payments and the arrangements in detail. That executive took the papers, understood what they meant, and brought them to federal investigators. What internal oversight had missed for years? A chance glance at a desk exposed in an afternoon. The man was arrested, and in time he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a term in federal prison. The immediate crisis passed. The deeper damage did not, because the years the scheme had run were precisely the years the company could least afford to have its judgment compromised. To see why, you have to place those years on the larger timeline of what was happening to retail itself. The scheme unraveled in 2008. That was the same stretch in which online commerce was going from a novelty to a force. The years in which a certain online retailer was turning the buying of electronics into something you did from a chair, with wider selection and lower prices than any physical store could match, delivered to your door. This was the existential threat to a business whose entire model was built on the assumption that people would drive to a giant building to see and touch a product before buying it. The one thing the company needed in those years was clear-eyed, honest, aggressive strategic attention to the question of how a big-box electronics retailer survives the internet. Instead, in the department that mattered most, attention had been diverted for years into a private fraud. This is the true cost of that kind of internal corruption, and it is almost never counted. The stolen money can be tallied. The lost focus cannot. While a competitor was rewriting the rules of the industry, the retailer's merchandising had been optimized for kickbacks rather than for the brutal problem of staying relevant. A company gets only a narrow window to respond to a disruption of that magnitude. And this company spent part of its window being robbed by the very people entrusted with its most important decisions. The response to online competition, when it came, was never sufficient. The company remained fundamentally a chain of enormous physical buildings in an era when the advantage was shifting decisively to those who did not need them. Its online presence never became a serious rival to the pure e-commerce players. Its great strengths, the vast selection you could hold in your hands, the theatrical stores, the midnight browsing, were exactly the strengths that the internet made least valuable. Selection had moved online and become effectively infinite. Convenience had been redefined as not having to leave your house at all. The temple was still standing, but the worshippers had found a new god, and it delivered. Then came the final mechanism, the one that turned a slow decline into a sudden collapse, and it is the most quietly instructive part of the whole story. As money grew tight, the company changed how it bought its inventory. Rather than purchasing goods from suppliers outright and owning them on the shelves, it moved toward a consignment model. The suppliers would keep ownership of the products, and the store would only pay for them after they sold. On paper, to a business short of cash, this looks like salvation. You no longer have to spend money to fill your shelves. You only pay once the customer has already paid you. The risk, in theory, shifts to the supplier. But a store is its shelves, and this is where the logic turned lethal. Many suppliers, looking at a retailer that was visibly struggling, simply declined to participate. Why hand your inventory to a chain that might not survive to sell it, and take on the risk of being paid last, if at all? Major manufacturers pulled back. One large supplier reportedly stopped doing business over unpaid bills. And so the very move meant to keep the company alive began to empty the one thing that made it a company at all. The shelves thinned. Then they went bare. Customers who walked in found aisles with gaps, then aisles with almost nothing, a giant themed building wrapped around a shrinking amount of actual merchandise. This produced a death spiral with a horrible internal logic. Empty shelves drove away the customers, which reduced sales, which gave suppliers even less reason to provide goods, which emptied the shelves further, which drove away more customers. Each turn of the wheel made the next turn worse. The store stopped being a place you could reliably buy things, and a store that is not reliably a place to buy things has already ceased to exist in every way except the legal one. Long before the doors were locked, the essential function had drained out of the building. What remained was architecture, the pharaoh, the flying saucer, standing guard over increasingly empty space. The pandemic that arrived in 2020 was the final weight on a structure already close to failing. It kept customers home, disrupted the supply chains that were already barely supplying the stores, and removed whatever slim margin the business had left. And so, in February of 2021, without the prolonged public bankruptcy that usually accompanies the fall of a chain this size, the company announced that it was winding down operations and closing every store, effective immediately. 36 years ended in a single day with a notice and a locked door. Thousands of employees learned that their jobs were over on the same day the public learned the stores were finished. It is worth sitting with the human shape of that. The people who worked the sales floors, who had answered the same technical questions for years and knew their regular customers, did not get a countdown. They got a closed sign. Retail failures of this kind are decided far above the floor in the accounts and the strategy, but they are absorbed at the floor by the people with the least say in any of the decisions that led there. And they were absorbed by customers too, in a smaller way, the tinkerers and engineers and midnight browsers who had a place that understood them, and then, abruptly, did not. It would be easy to file this away as another big box chain killed by the internet, and the internet was certainly the executioner. But that explanation is too clean, because it leaves out why this particular company was so poorly positioned to fight back when the fight arrived. Plenty of retailers faced the same online onslaught and adapted, painfully, and survived. The difference here was internal. This was a business whose most important decision-making function had been hijacked for private profit during the exact years it needed that function working at its best. The fraud did not just steal money. It stole attention and judgment at the moment they were most precious, and no court could order those returned. And the consignment ending carries a lesson that reaches well beyond one electronics chain. When a business under pressure starts protecting its cash by starving the very thing customers come for, it can produce a collapse that looks sudden but was actually a choice made in slow motion. The shelves were the product. Emptying them to preserve cash was, in effect, dismantling the store to pay for the store. It bought a little time and guaranteed the end. Any business can fall into this trap, cutting the quality, the inventory, the service, or the substance that was the whole reason customers showed up, in the name of survival, and in doing so removing the only reason to survive. The stores are gone now, the theming stripped out, the enormous buildings repurposed or empty. The name survives mostly as memory, invoked with real affection by the people who grew up wandering those aisles. What ended was not just a retailer, but a specific kind of place. Physical, generous, a little absurd, built on the belief that a store could be a destination and that serving a customer completely was a strategy that would last. It could have lasted longer. It was not only beaten by a faster competitor. It was weakened from within, by a trusted insider converting its judgment into his own fortune, and then finished off by a cash-saving maneuver that quietly emptied the shelves that were the entire point. The pharaoh watched over it to the end, golden and serene, presiding over a temple whose god had already left. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It recounts a corporate collapse and a criminal matter that concluded in a guilty plea and a federal prison sentence, based on publicly available court records and reporting from credentialed sources. Statements about the individual described reflect those public legal proceedings and their documented outcome. It makes no allegation of wrongdoing against any other person or company named. Source links are provided above.